Hi, I'm Dawn, and this is where Shabby meets Bling. In tonight's project, I'm going to be using a leftover portion of a previous flip and a newly thrifted item to create a table.
This is a Flippin' Furniture Saturday. My co-host tonight is Crystal from the Crafty Creech. You're going to find the links to her channel and this playlist in my description box below. So one day I was out thrifting, and we know I don't do that often. I was at the Goodwill and I picked up this pedestal. This plant stand, whatever you want to call it, it is made of plaster and it cost me $6.49. As you see, it has issues. It has cracks, it has chips, and it's painted very, very poorly. But we're going to change all that. This piece might look familiar to you if you saw my last furniture flip. This was the insert to an old chest, a silverware chest, which I turned into something really cool for my living room. I'll leave the link for that video in my description box. As I mentioned in that video, I had plans for this little insert, and today is the day she gets to shine. I'm going to use this little tray, this little insert, as a tabletop. You're never going to see the outside of this tray because I'm going to be covering it with lath. Yes, lath. Lath that is over 100 years old from my very own home, which I use all the time for all kinds of projects. Like in this project, you can check that out. But the reason I'm using it specifically tonight is to coordinate with this furniture flip project. This will be a companion piece. I am going to lay my lath out just like this all the way across so you can kind of see the way it's going to look. But it needs to be cut and it needs to be sanded. I will also use a couple of pieces of lath on the sides so you really will never ever see the tray itself unless you flip it over. I will be leaving a little lip, a little bit of the lath showing all the way around the top. Now to take this out to the chop saw and cut it to size. Here's what it looks like after it's been cut. Now, you will notice, and you will know this if you've ever used lath, that old lath is not all the same. As you can see, this piece is much smaller than this piece, and this piece is wider than this piece. So I have to make sure that certain ones are in certain locations on my design layout. But now that I have everything cut, I need to sand it. I am using my little palm sander and a 120 grit sandpaper to sand my lath. Because this creates so much dust, I have moved my little project outside temporarily. Now, I emptied the little bag on the back and I emptied all the channels inside the sander, but you can still see all the dust just a-flying. So it's much better for ventilation and for cleanliness to do this outside. I will sand all sides of my lath, everything except for my cuts, my ends. Those will get sanded after I glue this onto the top of that tray. But before I glue, I am going to rough up the surface of this tray, the top and all the sides, so that way my glue will adhere just that much better. Anytime you go to a lot of work, it is well worth it just to take that extra step to make sure your hard work pays off and lasts. Now that everything's sanded, we can glue. And you can see I'm using a plethora of wood glue on my lath because I want this to be permanent. I'm not going to use brads or nails or staples or anything because I don't want to see it. I am just using my wood glue. Off to the right, I have all of my lath pieces lined up in order that they will be applied to my tray. And I am making sure that I'm extremely straight on this. I will be painting a design on my tabletop, and part of the design is a stripe. So if I don't have my lath straight, my design is going to look wonky, and nobody wants that. After my lath is totally glued on, I am going to clamp all the pieces into place. I have used 2 pieces of wood, scrap wood, and 4 clamps to make this happen. Now I'm just going to have to be patient and set it aside till my wood glue dries thoroughly. You can see right here that after my glue is set, I will need to sand the edges. My little tabletop has been drying overnight, and now it is time to remove the clamps and see if everything adhered properly. So far, so good. It looks pretty darn good. Nothing is moving, nothing has shifted while drying. So the next thing we need to do is take it outside and sand those sides smooth, as I knew I would have to. I am not only sanding the sides smooth, but I will also hit the tabletop itself, because just like width for lath, the thickness of lath is not all uniform. So I need to sand the tabletop as well so that I have a relatively flat surface. Once finished with the top, I move on to the sides to make sure they are nice and smooth. This is why I had to sand that so incredibly smooth, so my side pieces would lay nice and flat right up against the side of the tray. But before I can glue my sides to the tray, I need to paint. And first, before you paint, we need to prep for paint. This little gadget is something I usually use on my keyboard to blow all the dust out of the keys, but I thought how perfect to use it to get all that dust from in between my lath pieces. Now, totally dust-free, I can add my brown packing paper and my painter's tape to the areas I want to section off, because I will be using spray paint. Normally, when I paint wood, I don't use spray paint. I will use a craft paint or a house paint, either interior or exterior, depending on what look I'm after. But in this case, I am going to spray paint because, once again, this has to look like the other project. It is a companion piece, and in that piece, I used spray paint. I am isolating the third piece of lath from both ends because these are the pieces that are going to get spray painted first. So once I have the center covered so no paint will get on it, then I need to add the brown packing paper and painter's tape onto the ends of my tabletop. Now to create a barrier in between the wood that I don't want painted and my spray painted area, I'm just using a matte Mod Podge. It doesn't matter what kind of Mod Podge you use here, but I feel a matte works just dandy, and I'm using it to paint along the edge of all of my painter's tape. This will seal it up nice and tight, so I shouldn't get too much bleeding of my spray paint onto areas that I don't want spray painted. I am using a Rust-Oleum spray paint, and this is the Ultimate High Gloss in Majestic Red. This is the exact same color that I used in that previous project. I will be giving my little tabletop 2 coats. So once this first coat is done, I will set it aside to dry. Then I will come back and hit it a second time. My paint is nice and dry. It doesn't look like it because it's a high gloss, but it is. Trust me, it's very dry. And this is the moment of truth. And look at that. Oh, no bleeding through of the paint at all. Not at all. Let's see if we're just as lucky with the outside of our stripes. I really taped it well, so it's making it a little bit difficult to reveal my finished stripe. But, look at that. Look at that. Absolutely perfect. Boy, did I get lucky. I didn't want any paint on that wood, and I was lucky enough I didn't have bleeding. Now I need to isolate a little tiny strip right next to that red stripe because I'm going to create a very thin black pinstripe. I want my pinstripe to be about the thickness of my lath, so I kind of line it up as a little guide, and I use my paper that I used from the first go round with the red paint. I use it again, so I'm not wasting anything, and I add my painter's tape. Then I will add the second piece of painter's tape on the opposite side, and then come back with the original piece of paper that I used and use that in the middle again to help cover the red stripes so they don't get painted black. Once the painter's tape is in place, I will seal those edges again, just like I did previously with Mod Podge. I have painted my little pinstripes, and now we're going to take a look. Let's see if we were lucky like we were the first time around. So far, so good. So far, so good. I didn't use quite as much tape this time, so the reveal should be a little quicker than it was previously. But look at that, nice and clean. Absolutely thrilled. Now I can continue painting the detail work that's going to go in between my red stripes. I am making a checkerboard, an actual real checkerboard. I previously measured out one of the widest pieces of lath and I made a little tiny paper template making it into a square. Now I'm using that template to measure out 8 squares across and 8 squares wide and making a little tiny mark and then coming back with my straight edge to draw a line because I'm going to be painting in every other square black. You can see I have already taken the opportunity to glue on the sides of my little table. They are clamped in place and those little pieces of wood you see poking up here and there and here and there all the way around the perimeter of my table are shims. These are allowing my clamps to hold 2 pieces of lath in place at once. Once my little grid pattern is all drawn out, I will begin to paint. I will be using an apple barrel matte black paint by Plaid to create my little squares. Now I have to be extraordinarily careful here because I do not wish to get any of this black paint on the squares that are going to remain natural. I take my time because I want my lines to be relatively straight. I am doing this free-handed without painter's tape, so I really do take my time, and it takes a lot of time, but I don't mind because I'm really liking the way it's looking. Another thing I have to be careful of is to not paint the wrong square. So at one point, I will just come back and hit every square that's going to be black with just a little bit of black paint as a reminder, a gentle reminder that I don't mess up and paint the wrong square. Once I have finished my little checkerboard pattern, I will set this aside to dry because we need to make some checkers. I am using flour clay to make my checkers. Flour clay and a little tiny round fondant cutter. I purchased the flour clay and the fondant cutters at Hobby Lobby. I tend to pick up my flour clay when it's on sale. I have tried to come up with a formula for it, but as of yet, I am out of luck. So until that time comes and I have a nice formula, I will continue to purchase it at Hobby Lobby. And when I say flour clay, it is Flower, like the kind you grow in your garden. I make numerous checkers and then I'm going to set them aside to dry. I've let them dry for a couple hours and now I'm just going to smooth all the little edges with some sandpaper, some relatively fine sandpaper. Right now they almost look like a little macarons with the little feet on the bottom, and that won't do because that doesn't look like a checker and I need this to look like a checker. So I just slowly sand it to get it nice and smooth. I also take the opportunity to brush off all of the cornstarch used in the process of actually making my little checker. And now we're going to paint. Yes, we are. We're going to paint half of them black, the same black that I used when I created my checkerboard. The other half will be painted red, and the red I will be using will be a real red. It is an apple barrel gloss by Plaid. Each checker gets 2 coats, both front and back. Once I've completed the painting of my checkers, I will set them aside to dry. While they were drying, I jumped into Canva and made some little images for my checkers. The black checkers will have little ice skates on them, and the red checkers will have little sleds. And I did create them with a little red circle around the perimeter, so I would have a guide when I cut them out. I do get a lot of questions on how I use Canva to create images, so I have a video available to members on how I actually use Canva step by step. Now, speaking of members, I would like to thank and welcome my newest member, Jackie from Jackie Burns Creations. Once I have all of my images cut out, I proceed to Mod Podge them, bust out the podge, and I will podge them onto each and every one of my little checkers. I am using matte Mod Podge to apply them onto the checkers, and then I coat the entire checker with the Mod Podge. Once both sides are totally dry, I do come back with a dishwasher safe Mod Podge because I do intend to use these outdoors. I will eventually down the road add a spring and summer image on the reverse side of my checkers. That way I can use them all year round. I still have one more thing I need to address. That original pedestal, that plant stand, it needed help, and it needed help bad. It not only had a broken corner, but it had a huge gap in the base. You can see it right there, and of course that happened when it was molded. But I intend to add a lath frame around the base, and it won't lay flush. So what I'm going to do is bust out the dry decks and fill that little hole in the corner, as well as that gap, that sway on the side of the base. I'm simply using a spackle knife to apply the dry decks. I get it as smooth as possible, and then I will set the whole piece aside to dry. And this will sit overnight because I need it to be extremely hard before I sand it. My dry decks dried really well, and I am very gently, very carefully sanding it. It doesn't have to be extremely flat and smooth, just relatively flat, so that way my lath piece will sit on here and nice and flat. I also sand the pedestal itself because there's areas that are chipped, and I try to smooth them as best I can. And there's also blobs of paint from the really shoddy paintwork. Whoever did this prior did not take their time, and they didn't do a good job. So I'm just trying to smooth away as much of that blobby paint as I can. After I've finished sanding, I am going to prep this for paint, and I am going to prep it and paint it in the exact same fashion as I did my little tabletop. I have already painted the areas majestic red that I wanted red, and I have already taped off those areas. So now I can take this back outside one last time and paint the rest of it black.
My little pub table is adorable. I can't wait to share it with all of you.
Here's the lath I added around the base. You can see it is the exact same way I bordered the top of my table. It is simply a frame that can be removed from the table base anytime I want. This frame marries the top of the table to the bottom of the table so it looks cohesive, so that it really looks like it goes together, like it was originally all one piece. The table sitting next to both my chairs gives you the real good idea of why I created the table the way I did, from the lath to the stripes to the colors. Now my sled chairs have a matching pub table. I think it's adorable. You could use this anywhere at all. I intend to use it on my front porch. The sleigh chairs were made to be outside. With a nice coating on the plaster base of the table, I can use it as well on my porch. Let's get a good look at the top of my table and that little checkerboard pattern. Here's my table. I'm very pleased with the way the pattern came out, from the stripes to the little checkerboard pattern. My little table, my little pub table, is ready for a morning cup of coffee, a late night hot chocolate, or how about a game of checkers? Let's add the checkers. We're all set up for a game. Look at the little checkers. Look how nice they look on the natural squares. I really am happy with the way they came out. They also were given a coat of a dishwasher safe Mod Podge, so they are weatherproof. The real red I used on my little sled checkers matches so well with that majestic red of the paint on the stripes. I'm so excited to be able to use this cute little pub table and play a game of checkers with my family this Christmas. I get to be Sleds. Thanks again to Crystal for joining me in this Flippin' Furniture Saturday. You're going to find the links to her channel and this playlist in my description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like, share it with your family and friends and anybody that likes repurposing, thrifting, DIYs, Christmas, winter, and holiday decor. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and don't forget to check out my shop on Etsy. Leave me a comment because I really do love hearing what you've got to say. Ring the bell for notifications of all my upcoming videos and subscribe. It's a great way to support my channel. Join. It's even a better way to support my channel. But for now, this is Dawn with Shabby Meets Bling. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time.